The bullet grazed so close to Eleanor Wright's cheek that she felt the heat of it before she heard the crack of the rifle. And in that moment, standing behind the counter of her father's general store in Abilene, Kansas, she knew her carefully constructed quiet life was about to shatter. It was the summer of 1878, and the cattle drives had brought more than just longhorns and dusty cowboys to town. They had brought trouble in the form of the Mackenzie gang, 4 brothers who had decided that robbing honest merchants was easier than honest work. Eleanor's father lay on the floor behind her, clutching his bleeding shoulder, and she stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form words that would not come. "Well now, looks like the little lady's got nothing to say," sneered the youngest Mackenzie, his gun still smoking. "Hand over the cash box, girl, or the next one goes through your daddy's skull." Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for the metal box beneath the counter. Her lips moved, forming the beginning of a sentence, but the sounds tangled in her throat like barbed wire. The stutter that had plagued her since childhood always grew worse when fear took hold, and right now, terror had her in its grip. "PPP, please," she finally managed, hating the way the word broke apart in her mouth. The Mackenzie brothers laughed, a cruel sound that made her cheeks burn with shame. She thrust the cash box toward them, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. They grabbed it and ran, their boots thundering across the wooden floor and out into the dusty street. That was when he walked in. The cowboy was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a winter sky. He wore a beaten leather hat and a gun belt that sat easy on his hips, the kind of ease that came from knowing how to use what he carried. He took one look at Eleanor's tear-stained face, then at her father bleeding on the floor, and his jaw tightened. "Which way?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Eleanor pointed toward the door, still unable to force out complete words. The cowboy nodded once and strode out into the bright afternoon sun. She heard shouting, then the rapid crack of gunfire. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she knelt beside her father, pressing a clean cloth against his wound. "It's all right, Ellie girl," her father whispered, his face pale but his eyes alert. "Just a flesh wound. I have survived worse." Minutes stretched like hours before the cowboy returned, the cash box tucked under one arm. He set it gently on the counter, then crouched beside them. "The sheriff's got them now, all 4, trussed up like Christmas turkeys." His eyes met Eleanor's, and something in his expression was so kind that she felt her chest tighten. "Is he hurt bad?" Aye, Eleanor started, then stopped, her face flushing hot with frustration and embarrassment. "Take your time," the cowboy said, not looking away, not showing any impatience or mockery. "There's no rush." But Eleanor shook her head, turning away to hide her face. Her father spoke instead, explaining that he needed the doctor. The cowboy stood immediately, moving with quick efficiency to help lift the older man. Between them, they got him next door to Doc Morrison's office, where the gray-haired physician took over with practiced hands. In the waiting room, Eleanor sat on a hard wooden chair, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The cowboy sat across from her, his hat resting on his knee. "Name's James Cordell," he said quietly. "Most folks call me Cord. I was passing through looking for work. Heard there might be ranch jobs south of here." Eleanor nodded but did not speak. She wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him that he had saved her father's life and probably hers too, but the words locked behind her teeth. "You do not have to talk if you do not want to," Cord continued, his voice gentle. "But if you do want to, I am a patient man." Something about the way he said it, without pity or condescension, made Eleanor look up. Their eyes met, and she saw nothing but honest kindness there. She took a slow breath. "Th, thank you," she managed, "for helping us." "You are most welcome, miss," he smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. "Takes courage to stand up to armed men like that. Your daddy should be proud." Eleanor felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. She had encountered many people in her 22 years, and most of them reacted to her stutter in one of 2 ways. Either they finished her sentences for her, impatient and dismissive, or they looked away in embarrassment as if her struggle to speak was something shameful. This cowboy did neither. He simply waited, his attention steady and unhurried. Over the next hour, while Doc Morrison worked on her father's shoulder, Eleanor and Cord sat in that small waiting room and something unexpected happened. They talked. Or rather, Cord talked and Eleanor listened, occasionally managing a few words of her own. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Montana, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17, about spending the last 7 years drifting from job to job, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "I reckon I am looking for something," he admitted, turning his hat in his hands. "Just have not figured out what yet." "And maybe you'll find it here," Eleanor said, and was rewarded with another one of his smiles. When Doc Morrison finally emerged, he assured them that Eleanor's father would be fine. The bullet had passed clean through the muscle without hitting bone or artery. He would need rest and care, but he would recover fully. Relief washed over Eleanor so strongly that she felt dizzy with it. "You will need help running the store while your father heals," Doc Morrison said, giving her a knowing look. "Cannot manage it alone, Ellie." Eleanor's heart sank. The doctor was right, but she could hardly bear the thought of trying to serve customers, trying to conduct transactions while her tongue tied itself in knots. People in town knew about her stutter, of course, but that did not make it any easier to face their impatience or awkward sympathy day after day. "I could help," Cord said suddenly. "I mean, if you need someone, I am good with numbers and I know merchandise." "Worked in a trading post up north for a spell." Eleanor stared at him, surprised and uncertain. He met her gaze steadily. "Only if you want the help," he added. "No obligation, but the job south can wait a few weeks and it seems like you could use an extra pair of hands." She should have said no. She barely knew this man, despite his heroics, but something in her, some instinct she could not quite name, told her to trust him. "Why, yes," she said. "PP, please. We need help." And so James Cordell stayed. The next days fell into a rhythm that surprised Eleanor with its ease. Cord proved true to his word. He knew his way around a store, stocking shelves with quick efficiency and handling customers with a friendly professionalism that put people at ease. More importantly, he seemed to have an instinct for when Eleanor felt capable of speaking and when she needed him to take over. He never made her feel lesser for it. When she struggled with a customer, he would simply step in naturally, as if they had planned it that way all along. And when she managed to complete a transaction on her own, he would catch her eye and give her a small nod of approval that made warmth bloom in her chest. Her father, recovering upstairs in their small living quarters above the store, noticed the change in her. "You smile more," he said one evening as Eleanor brought him his supper. "That cowboy treating you well?" "Why, yes, Papa," Eleanor said, setting the tray across his lap. "He's very kind," her father repeated, his eyes twinkling despite his pain. "And handsome too, I would wager." "Papa." Eleanor's cheeks flamed, but she could not help the smile that tugged at her lips. Her father laughed, then winced and pressed a hand to his bandaged shoulder. "I am just saying, Ellie girl, you deserve someone who sees you for who you are, not what you sound like." The words stayed with Eleanor as she returned downstairs, where Cord was closing up the store for the night. The evening lights slanted through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Cord looked up as she descended the stairs, and the smile that crossed his face made her heart skip. "How's your father?" he asked, sliding the bolt home on the front door. Getting stronger," Eleanor said. She moved to help him cover the display barrels, their hands brushing as they worked. Each accidental touch sent electricity up her arm. "I am glad," Cord said. "He is a good man, you can tell by the way he raised his daughter." Eleanor looked up, startled by the compliment. "You don't really know me?" "I know enough," Cord said softly. He paused in his work, holding her gaze. "I know you are brave. I know you love your father and work hard to take care of him. I know you have a beautiful smile, even though you do not show it often enough." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "And I know that when you talk, I want to hear every word, no matter how long it takes you to say them." Eleanor's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this with such simple, honest regard. "I stutter when I am nervous," she warned him, the words coming out in a rush. "Then I will wait however long it takes," Cord said, and the promise in his voice made her believe him. They stood there in the golden light of the dying day, the store quiet around them, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, this feeling that was growing between them. The summer days stretched long and warm, and with each one, Eleanor found herself falling a little more in love with the quiet cowboy who had walked into her life on the worst day she could remember. Cord was patient not just with her words, but with everything. He took time to learn what she needed, to understand her silences as well as her speech. He made her laugh with dry observations about picky customers and elaborate stories from his wandering years. And slowly, carefully, he began to court her with a gentleness that took her breath away. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie, great bunches of black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers that she arranged in jars around the store. He stayed late after closing to help with inventory, and they would work side by side in companionable silence, occasionally broken by conversation that grew easier with each passing day. He never rushed her, never showed frustration when her words tangled. He simply waited, his attention never wavering, until she could say what she needed to say. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after he had first arrived, they sat together on the porch behind the store, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. Eleanor's father had finally come downstairs that afternoon, his arm in a sling but his spirits high. He had insisted on minding the store for a few hours, shooing them outside to enjoy the summer evening. "Your father is healing well," Cord observed, his shoulder pressed against hers on the narrow bench. "Thanks to you," Eleanor said. "If you hadn't been there that D-Day." "But I was there," Cord interrupted gently. "And I am grateful for it because it means I met you." Eleanor turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "You don't have to stay," she said quietly. "Papa is getting better. You could go south and find that work you were looking for." "Is that what you want?" Cord asked, his eyes searching hers. "For me to go?" "And no," Eleanor whispered, the word barely audible. "I want you to stay, but I don't want you to feel obligated." Cord reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "Ellie, I have been drifting for 7 years, looking for something I could not name. And then I walked into your store and found it." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I found you, and if you will have me, I would like to stay, not out of obligation, but because there is nowhere else I would rather be." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I would like that," she managed, her voice breaking with emotion. Very much." Cord smiled and pulled her close, tucking her against his side. They sat like that as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and Eleanor felt a peace she had never known. For the first time in her life, her stutter did not feel like a burden or a shame. With Cord, it was just part of who she was, and he loved her anyway. He loved her completely. The town of Abilene noticed, of course. Small towns always did. There were whispers and speculation about the drifter cowboy who had stayed for the storekeeper's daughter. Some were kind, genuinely happy to see Eleanor finding love. Others were less charitable, wondering what a strong, capable man like James Cordell could want with a girl who could barely string a sentence together. Eleanor tried not to let the gossip bother her, but it stung nonetheless. She was in the store alone one afternoon, Cord having gone to help her father move some heavy crates upstairs, when Mrs. Henrietta Blackwood came in. The woman was Abilene's most notorious gossip, a widow with too much time and too little kindness. "Eleanor, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I wanted to have a little talk with you, woman to woman." Eleanor's stomach tightened with dread. "Hello, Mrs. B. Blackwood, how can I help you?" It is about that cowboy of yours, Mrs. Blackwood said, leaning across the counter conspiratorially. People are talking, wondering about his intentions. A man like that, drifting into town with nothing to his name, suddenly playing the hero and staying on, makes a person wonder what he is really after. The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. Cord is a good man, she said, her hands shaking. I am sure he seems that way, Mrs. Blackwood continued, clearly enjoying herself. But you must consider, dear, why would a man like him be interested in you? No offense, but you are not exactly a catch. That unfortunate impediment of yours, the struggle you have with simple conversation. Most men would find that tiresome. So one has to wonder what he really wants. The store, perhaps, your father's savings. Eleanor felt heat rising in her face, a mixture of anger and humiliation. She wanted to defend Cord, to tell this hateful woman that she was wrong, but her tongue had frozen in her mouth. The stutter that was manageable around Cord became a wall of silence around people like Mrs. Blackwood. No, she finally forced out, but Mrs. Blackwood was already turning away with a satisfied smile. Just something to think about, dear. A girl like you cannot afford to be foolish about these things. Eleanor stood behind the counter, shaking with anger and hurt as the woman swept out of the store. She hated that the words had gotten to her, hated that they had planted even the tiniest seed of doubt. But she could not help wondering, what did Cord see in her? She was plain and awkward, cursed with a tongue that betrayed her at every turn. Why would a man like him, strong and capable and whole, want someone broken like her? Ellie. Cord's voice broke through her spiral of thoughts. He had come down from upstairs and was looking at her with concern. What's wrong? You look upset. And nothing, Eleanor lied, but she could not meet his eyes. Cord crossed to her in 2 long strides, his hands gentle on her shoulders. That is not nothing. Talk to me, please. So Eleanor told him haltingly and with many pauses about Mrs. Blackwood's visit and her poisonous words. With each sentence she watched Cord's face, waiting for him to look away to show some sign that the widow had been right. But instead, his expression grew darker with anger. That woman had no right, he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. No right at all to speak to you that way. But what if she's our right, Eleanor whispered. What if I am not enough for you? What if you get tired of waiting for me to tea-talk? Cord cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me, Ellie, really listen. I do not care about your stutter. I do not care that sometimes it takes you a minute to say what you want to say. You know what I care about, the things you say when you finally say them. The way you think about things, the kindness in your heart, the strength it takes you to face every day when you know people are going to judge you. His thumbs brushed away tears she had not realized were falling. You are not broken, Ellie. You are perfect, exactly as you are. And anyone who cannot see that is a fool. But why? Eleanor asked, her voice breaking. Why do you love me? Because you make me laugh, Cord said simply. Because you are brave in ways most people never have to be. Because when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out. Because you listened to my stories about my life without judging me for drifting. Because you trusted me when you had no reason to. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. Because from the moment I saw you standing in that store, scared but standing your ground, I knew you were someone special. And every day since then has just proved me right. Eleanor felt something break open inside her, all the fear and doubt flooding out to be replaced with certainty. This man loved her, truly, completely, wholly loved her, not despite her stutter, not because he was settling, but because of who she was. I love you, she said, the words coming clearer than they had in her life. I love you, Cord. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Eleanor felt like she was flying. When they broke apart, both breathless and smiling, she saw her father watching from the stairs, a knowing grin on his weathered face. About time, he said, and they all laughed. That autumn, as the leaves turned gold and the cattle drive slowed, Cord asked Eleanor's father for permission to marry her. The older man gave his blessing without hesitation, having seen for months the way the cowboy looked at his daughter, the way he treated her with respect and love. The wedding took place in October in the small church at the end of Main Street. Eleanor wore her mother's dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried a bouquet of the last prairie flowers of the season. As she walked down the aisle on her father's good arm, she saw Cord waiting at the altar, and the look on his face took her breath away. He looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When it came time for the vows, Eleanor's hands shook. The church was full of people, all watching her, waiting. Her old fears rose up, whispering that she would humiliate herself, that she would stumble over the words. But then Cord took her hands in his, steady and sure, and smiled at her. "Take your time," he whispered, just for her ears. "I will wait however long it takes." And so Eleanor spoke her vows, slowly but clearly, her stutter barely present because she was not nervous. How could she be nervous when she was marrying her best friend, the man who had taught her that love meant patience, that her voice was worth hearing no matter how long it took to speak? They moved into the rooms above the store, and Cord became a full partner in the business. He had a head for numbers and a way with people that helped the store thrive. But more than that, he and Eleanor were a team, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses, learning the rhythms of married life with joy and occasional frustration, and always, always with love. Winter came, bringing cold winds that rattled the windows and snow that piled in drifts along Main Street. Business slowed, as it always did in the cold months, and Eleanor and Cord spent long evenings by the fire, talking and planning for the future. Her father, fully healed now, had taken to spending his evenings at the saloon playing cards with his friends, giving the young couple privacy. "I was thinking," Cord said one night as they lay in bed, Eleanor tucked against his side. "When spring comes, maybe we could expand. Build on a proper storeroom, maybe add some space upstairs." "For storage?" Eleanor asked, though she suspected he meant something else. "For a nursery," Cord said softly. "Someday, when we are ready, if you want children." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. She had thought about this, about what it would mean to have children, to potentially pass her stutter on to them. But with Cord, she was not afraid. If her children stuttered, they would grow up knowing it did not make them less. They would have a father who would wait however long it takes for them to speak. "I want that," she said. Very much," Cord kissed the top of her head. "No rush, we have all the time in the world." But life, Eleanor was learning, had its own timeline. By the time the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared on the prairie, she knew she was carrying their child. The realization filled her with equal parts terror and joy. She told Cord one evening in early April as they were closing up the store. "I am going to have a bee baby," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Cord froze, a sack of flour in his hands, and stared at her. For a moment, Eleanor feared she had broken him. Then his face split into the widest grin she had ever seen. He dropped the flour sack where he stood and crossed to her, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." They laughed and cried together, holding each other in the quiet store as the spring wind whispered outside. Eleanor's father was thrilled when they told him, already making plans for grandparent duties and talking about expanding his card games to fund a proper savings for his grandchild. The pregnancy was hard on Eleanor. She was sick most mornings, and her body felt strange and unwieldy as the months passed. But Cord was there for every moment, rubbing her feet when they swelled, bringing her strange foods she craved at odd hours, reading aloud to her when she was too tired to do anything but rest. "You are going to be such a good father," she told him one evening in late summer, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "I am going to try," Cord said, kneeling beside her chair and pressing a kiss to her stomach. "Going to teach him to ride and rope and be kind to people. Especially people who are different." "Him?" Eleanor teased. Could be a girl, her then," Cord amended with a grin. "I will teach her to be strong and brave, just like her mother." The baby came in September after a long and difficult labor that left Eleanor exhausted but elated. It was a boy with a thick shock of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. They named him Thomas after Cord's father, and he was perfect. Cord held his son with a reverence that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "I am your papa, and I am going to love you forever." Those early months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but Eleanor had never been happier. Watching Cord with their son, seeing the gentleness in his strong hands as he changed diapers and soothed cries, filled her with a love so profound it sometimes took her breath away. Thomas grew from an infant to a curious toddler who explored every inch of the store, getting into everything and making customers laugh with his antics. He was 3 when Eleanor realized she was pregnant again, and this time the joy was uncomplicated by fear. She knew what to expect, knew they could handle it together. Their daughter arrived the following spring, smaller and quieter than her brother had been. They named her Sarah after Eleanor's mother. She had Cord's blue eyes and Eleanor's dark hair, and from the beginning she was a daddy's girl, content only when Cord held her. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. The store continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of Abilene's business district. Cord's reputation as an honest and fair merchant spread, and people came from miles around to trade with them. Eleanor found that her stutter bothered her less as the years passed. It was still there, especially when she was tired or stressed, but with Cord's patient support, she had learned not to let it define her. Thomas started school when he was 6, a bright and energetic boy who made friends easily. Eleanor had worried he might inherit her stutter, but while he sometimes stumbled over words when excited, he did not share her struggle. Sarah, quieter and more introspective, did. At 4 years old, she began to show the same patterns Eleanor remembered from her own childhood, the frustration when words would not come, the shame when other children laughed. Eleanor's heart broke for her daughter, but Cord handled it with the same patient love he had always shown Eleanor. "Words are important," he told Sarah one evening as she cried over a boy at school who had mocked her. "But they are not the only important thing. What matters is what is in here." He tapped her chest over her heart. "And you have so much good in there, sweetheart, so much love and kindness. Anyone who cannot see that because of how you talk is missing out." But it's hard, Papa," Sarah sobbed. "I know it is," Cord said, pulling her into his lap. "Your mama knows too, but you know what? Your mama is the bravest person I know, and you are just like her. You can do hard things." Watching them together, Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. This was what love looked like. This was what it meant to be truly seen and accepted. The years passed in a cascade of moments both ordinary and extraordinary. There were hard times, like when a fire broke out in the neighboring building and they spent a terrifying night fighting to save the store. There were sad times, like when Eleanor's father passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, surrounded by the family he loved. But there were far more good times than bad. Birthday parties and Christmas mornings, summer picnics by the creek and winter evenings reading by the fire. Thomas growing into a tall, capable young man who wanted to be a rancher. And Sarah overcoming her stutter through sheer determination to become a teacher who specialized in helping children with speech difficulties. Eleanor and Cord grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Cord's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines appeared around Eleanor's eyes from years of smiling. They celebrated 20 years of marriage with a quiet dinner at home, their children grown and starting lives of their own. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky. "Staying here instead of drifting. Sometimes I wonder if you gave up too much for me." Cord took her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "Ellie, the day I walked into your store was the day my life began. Everything before that was just waiting." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles the way he had done 1,000 times before. I found my home with you. I found my purpose with you. I found everything I ever needed with you. "I'll love you," Eleanor said, the words as clear as they had ever been. Her stutter was barely there now, softened by age and Cord's unwavering patience. "I will love you until my last breath. And I will love you beyond that," Cord promised. They sat together as the stars emerged, two people who had found each other against all odds. Eleanor thought back to that terrified girl behind the store counter, struggling to speak, certain she would never be loved. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming. Tell her about the cowboy who would walk into her life and change everything. Tell her that love was not about perfect words or flawless speech. It was about patience and kindness and choosing each other every single day. When Thomas married a kind ranch owner's daughter 2 years later, Cord and Eleanor stood proud as his parents, welcoming their new daughter into the family. Sarah followed 3 years after, marrying a gentle schoolteacher from Wichita, and Eleanor cried happy tears at both weddings, grateful beyond measure that her children had found partners who loved them wholly. The grandchildren came in due time. Thomas had 3 children in quick succession, 2 girls and a boy who kept the ranch alive with their energy and laughter. Sarah had twins, a boy and a girl, and the girl showed signs of a stutter at age 5. But she was growing up in a world that knew better than to judge, surrounded by a family who would wait however long it takes for her to speak. Eleanor and Cord became the wise elders of the family, the ones the younger generations turned to for advice and stories. They told tales of the old days, of cattle drives and outlaws, of a time when Abilene was rough and wild. But mostly, they told the story of how they met, and how a patient cowboy had fallen in love with a girl who stuttered. "The best things are worth waiting for," Cord would always say when he told the story. "Your grandmother was worth waiting for, still is." As they entered their 60s, Eleanor and Cord began to slow down. They handed more and more of the store's operations to Thomas, who had found he loved running the business as much as ranching. They spent their days helping with grandchildren, tending a small garden behind the store, and enjoying the quiet contentment that came with a life well lived. One evening, sitting on their favorite bench behind the store, the same bench where Cord had first told Eleanor he loved her nearly 30 years ago, Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder. "We did good, didn't we?" she asked softly. "We did better than good," Cord said, his arm coming around her shoulders. "We built something beautiful, a family, a business, a life. We did it together, and that is what matters." "I never thought I would have this," Eleanor admitted. When I was young, I thought my stutter meant I would be alone, that no one would want to wait for me to talk. Cord turned to face her, his weathered hand gentle on her cheek. "Then I am glad I proved you wrong. Because waiting for you to speak, hearing your voice, your thoughts, your heart, that has been the greatest privilege of my life. I would wait 1,000 lifetimes to hear what you have to say, Ellie, because what you say matters. You matter, you always have." Eleanor kissed him then, soft and slow, pouring 30 years of love into that kiss. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "I'll love you, James Cordell," she said, "and I love you, Eleanor Cordell," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They sat together as the sun set on another day, another year, another chapter of their beautiful life together. Around them, the world had changed. Abilene was no longer the wild cattle town it had been when they were young. The railroad had brought civilization and the rough edges had smoothed over time. But some things never changed. Love was still love, family was still family, and patience was still the greatest gift one person could give another. Years continued their steady march forward. Eleanor and Cord celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. Their small house above the store filled to bursting with 3 generations of family. There was food and laughter, stories told and retold, and at the center of it all, 2 people who had chosen each other and never looked back. When the party wound down and the family had dispersed, Eleanor and Cord stood at their bedroom window, looking out over the town that had been their home for so long. 40 years, Eleanor marveled. It feels like yesterday and forever all at once. That is how you know it was a life worth living, Cord said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. When the years fly by but every moment still matters. They were both in their mid-60s now, their bodies showing the wear of a life filled with hard work and love. Cord's hands were gnarled from decades of labor, and Eleanor's back often ached in the mornings. But they faced these challenges together, helping each other through the difficulties that came with aging. One spring morning, when Eleanor was 67 and Cord was 69, Eleanor woke to find Cord already dressed and pacing by the window. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up in concern. Cord turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes she had not seen in years. Nervousness. Uncertainty. "I have been thinking," he said slowly. "We have spent our whole lives in this town, in this store. We have done good work here, raised our children here, but there is so much we have not seen. Places we talked about visiting but never did because there was always something that needed doing." Eleanor listened, intrigued. "What would you say," Cord continued, "to selling the store to Thomas and taking a trip? A real trip, not just to Wichita or Kansas City, but out west. To see the mountains I grew up near, to show you Montana and maybe even California." Eleanor's heart skipped. She had never traveled far from Abilene, never felt she could because of the store, the family, the responsibilities. But now, with Thomas more than capable of running things and the grandchildren nearly grown, maybe it was possible. "I would say yes," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "I would say it's about tea time we had an adventure." And so, in the summer of their 68th and 70th years respectively, Eleanor and Cord sold the store to Thomas and set out on a journey west. They traveled by train and stagecoach, seeing landscapes Eleanor had only read about in books. They visited the Montana ranch where Cord had grown up, now owned by strangers but still beautiful in its wild remoteness. They stood at the edge of the Pacific Ocean in California, holding hands as waves crashed against the shore, and Eleanor felt like she was touching the edge of the world. Throughout it all, Cord's patience never wavered. When Eleanor struggled to communicate with strangers in new places, he was there, his quiet support giving her courage. When she felt overwhelmed by the noise and chaos of big cities, he found quiet places for them to rest. And every evening, no matter where they were, he told her he loved her. They returned to Abilene 6 months later, full of stories and memories, ready to settle into a quieter life. They moved into a small house near Sarah's family, content to spend their remaining years watching their legacy grow. Thomas's children were having children of their own now, making Eleanor and Cord great-grandparents. The family tree that had started with 2 people was now a sprawling thing, full of branches and love. Eleanor's Stutter, which had been her constant companion for nearly 7 decades, had become such a familiar part of her that she rarely thought about it anymore. Oh, it was still there, especially when she was tired or emotional, but it no longer defined her. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a successful businesswoman, a friend. The Stutter was just one small part of a much larger, richer whole. On a quiet evening in early autumn, when Eleanor was 74 and Cord was 76, they sat in rocking chairs on their front porch, watching the leaves turn gold. Cord's health had been declining lately, his heart not as strong as it once was. They both knew their time together was growing shorter, but they did not speak of it. Instead, they savored each moment, each touch, each word. "Read to me?" Eleanor asked, and Cord picked up the book they had been working through, a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. His voice, though older and sometimes shaky, still had the power to soothe her. She listened with her eyes closed, holding his free hand, memorizing the feeling of this moment. This perfect, ordinary moment that was somehow everything. When he finished the poem, Cord set the book aside and looked at her. Ellie, if I could live my life over again, knowing everything that would happen, I would not change a single thing, because every choice I made led me to you, and you have made my life complete." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You saved me," she whispered. "Not just that D-Day in the store, but every D-Day after. You taught me that I was worth loving." "You taught me what love really means," Cord countered. "You taught me patience, courage, strength. Everything good in my life came from loving you." They sat together until the stars came out, two old souls who had found each other in the wild young days of the West and built a life that would echo through generations. Cord passed peacefully in his sleep 2 years later with Eleanor holding his hand. At his funeral, the church was packed with family and friends, all of them gathering to honor a man who had lived his life with integrity and love. Eleanor, devastated but dry-eyed, stood before them all and spoke. Her stutter was pronounced that day, emotion making it worse. But she did not let it stop her. She talked about the cowboy who had walked into her father's store and changed her life. She talked about his patience, his kindness, his unwavering love. And she talked about what he had taught her and their children and their children's children. "Love means waiting," she said, her voice strong despite its breaks. "It means seeing someone for who they truly are and loving them not despite their flaws but with them. Cord taught me that, and he taught all of you, and that is the legacy he leaves behind." There was not a dry eye in the church. Eleanor lived another 8 years without Cord, years filled with great-grandchildren and even great-great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged until the end, still telling stories, still offering advice, still embodying the strength and grace her family associated with her. On her 86th birthday, surrounded by so much family that they spilled out of Sarah's house into the yard, Eleanor looked around at the life she and Cord had built. 4 children had become dozens of descendants, each one carrying forward the values they had been taught. Love, patience, kindness, acceptance. These were the Cordell family legacy, and Eleanor was proud beyond measure. That night, as Sarah helped her into bed, Eleanor took her daughter's hand. "I am ready," she said softly. "I miss your father. I am ready to be with him again." Sarah, now in her 50s and long past her own struggles with stuttering, kissed her mother's forehead. "Then go to him, Mama. He has been waiting for you. You know he is patient." Eleanor smiled at that, and when she closed her eyes, she was thinking of Cord. Of the day they met, of their wedding, of 1,000 small moments that had made up their life together. And as she drifted away, she could almost hear his voice. "I will wait however long it takes." She passed peacefully in the night, and when they laid her to rest beside Cord in the Abilene cemetery, the entire town turned out to say goodbye to a woman who had lived her life with grace and courage. On their shared headstone, Thomas had inscribed the words that defined their love story, Eleanor and James Cordell. She spoke, he listened. Their love was patient, and it lasted forever. Years would pass, and the town of Abilene would continue to change and grow. The Wild West would become history, stories told to children who could not imagine a time of cattle drives and outlaws. But the Cordell family would remain, generation after generation, carrying forward the story of a cowboy who walked into a store one summer day and fell in love with a girl who stuttered. And in every generation, when someone felt different or broken or less than, the family would tell them about Eleanor and Cord, about how love means waiting, about how the right person sees past what the world calls flaws to the beautiful, worthy soul beneath, about how a life built on patience and acceptance can create a legacy that lasts forever. The youngest Cordell, a great-great-great-granddaughter named Eleanor after her ancestor, struggled with a speech impediment of her own. At 8 years old, she was teased at school, and she came home crying to her mother. Her mother sat her down and told her the story. The whole story, every detail preserved through generations of retellings. She told her about a girl who thought she would never be loved and a cowboy who taught her otherwise. She told her about patience and courage and building a life together. And she told her daughter that she came from a long line of strong women who did not let anything stop them from living fully and loving deeply. "Your great-great-great-grandmother changed the world," she said. "Not by being perfect, but by being brave enough to be herself, and you can do the same." Young Eleanor listened, wide-eyed, and when her mother finished, she asked, "What did Papa Cord say when she told him about her stutter?" Her mother smiled and repeated the words that had been passed down through more than a century. "Then I will wait however long it takes." And young Eleanor understood, in the way children sometimes do, that she was part of something bigger than herself. A love story that had started in 1878 and rippled forward through time, touching every generation that came after. She would carry that knowledge with her as she grew, drawing strength from the story of two people who chose each other, who built a life together against the odds, who proved that love, real love, is patient and kind and lasting. And someday, when she was old enough, she would tell the story to her own children, ensuring that Eleanor and Cord's legacy lived on forever. Because some love stories are so powerful they transcend time. They become more than just the story of two people. They become lessons, inspiration, proof that in a world that often values perfection, there is profound beauty in simply being patient enough to truly see another person. Eleanor Wright and James Cordell's story was one such tale. It began with violence and fear and a girl who could not speak. But it became something beautiful, a testament to the transformative power of patient love. And though they had been gone for generations, their story lived on, whispered in nurseries and told at family gatherings, a reminder that the best things in life are always worth waiting for.